Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today on behalf of the Barrington Land Conservation Trust to this kickoff for the Pollinator Pathway here in Barrington. I'll introduce Louise in a moment, but I wanted to speak briefly about why the Land Trust started the Pollinator Pathway project. So our aim with this project is to help raise awareness about the need for more pollinator-friendly habitat here in Barrington. The Land Trust owns and protects pockets of habitat on our nature preserves and land holdings, but these properties are scattered all over town. So we want to be a catalyst for other groups and residents to help expand these pathways and create more pollinator-friendly habitat in their own yards and spaces. The Pollinator Pathway New England, which Louise helped create, has an amazing website. Everything from how to get started with a pollinator garden, what natives to plant, and ongoing webinars and articles. And that's where you can go to register your property on the Pollinator Pathway map. It's really fun to go in and see who in town, register. Is my sound a little off? No, I'm good.
Okay. Sound okay. It's good if everyone else mutes, I think, while one person's talking. That helps.
Thank you. Anyway, the map on the Pollinator Pathway Northeast page is really fun to go see who in town is registered, who in your neighborhood is starting to create pathways. So I really suggest everyone go in and register your property. It's just a lot of fun to see. So the Barrington Land Trust role in this is to help be a conduit for activities here in town. So if you want to publicize an event, have a planning party, you're looking for partners to help create more pollinator gardens, please reach out to us, and we'll reach out to everyone who's registered for this event periodically with news and updates and hopefully seminars. And we do hope to have a plant sale. Now we're looking at the fall. So, and if you have questions, please post them in the chat and we'll get to those after Louise's talk and try to answer as many or all of them as we can. All right, so Louise, who's been so gracious in all of this, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Louise Washer serves on the steering committee of the Pollinator Pathway Northeast, which she helped create in 2017 in Wilton, Connecticut, and which has since spread to over 235 towns across the region. She also serves as president of the Norwalk River Watershed Association, as a member of the Norwalk Mayor's Water Quality Committee, and on the steering committee of the Hudson to Housatonic Regional Conservation Partnership. So Louise, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming. I love talking about the Pollinator Pathway, so I'm going to share my screen and show you some images. Hold on a second. Where's my thing here? Here we go. Get out of that. Oops, no, I don't want to do that. Sorry, I don't know why it's doing that. As many times as you do this, like the technology is always not my favorite part. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to just start by kind of going over what the Pollinator Pathway is, a little quick history of how it got started. And Cindy already sort of talked about the basic idea is creating corridors. So what is a pathway? You guys will be able to see when people want to get admitted. What is a pollinator pathway? It is, the way we look at it, as Cindy was saying, these blobs, these green blobs are the protected space, protected open space. And then these checker blocks are our properties. And if we can manage our properties as habitat for birds and pollinators, we can act as connectors, allowing them to move, to find a mate, to find the special plants that they need, whatever it is they need to move, and also in response to climate change to be able to migrate. Most of these ideas, if you guys are familiar with Doug Ptolemy's work, he's the professor out of University of Delaware who wrote Bringing Nature Home and all these things. His ideas are at the heart of this work. This is just another image of what we're talking about. I love this house down here. We're like, you want to be the middle house. These guys have obviously put in, native shrubs and perennials, and there's less lawn, and they're a connection to this forest and tree area in the back. background. So they're working to reconnect this fragmented landscape. Um, and then one good thing about the pollinator pathway is that it's very focused on the positive, the things that you can do to bring more butterflies and birds to your yard. There are some grim statistics that I have one slide with bad news, so here it is. But it is good in case, most of us are aware of, say, that big German study that was done a couple years ago that showed a 76% decline in all flying insects. That was an important study scientifically because there were these open spaces in Germany that they had been monitoring for that whole period. And it just shows that this is a global and broad problem, these declines. But we're much more familiar with numbers like the declines in monarch populations, colony collapse with honeybees, and there also have been some studies showing that our native bees, our native bumblebees, are in decline by as much as 96% for some species. So anyway, this is why we're here. This is why we're talking about what we can do for the pollinators. I have this in because when I came to this project, I came to this from working for the Watershed Association. I was like, I don't want people to use pesticides on their lawns because it goes into our rivers and into Long Island Sound. So, but then I started learning about pollinators and native plants, and like the world changed for me. It's so fascinating, but it's also, I can't believe how much I didn't know. For example, I just thought of bees as honeybees, like a lot of people do. I just didn't distinguish between bees and even really yellow jackets. But there are the diversity of native bees, of ground nesting, solitary bees. It's just, once they start visiting your yard with more regularity and you're paying attention, it's just a huge adventure figuring out the native bees. So what are the threats to them, to the pollinators? Loss and fragmentation of habitat, as we talked about, that we're focused on with connecting pathways. Pesticides and lawn chemicals, especially the weed and feed combinations, are harmful. Invasive plants and just a lack of plant diversity. So whether it's invasives that are keeping the natives from growing, or it's landscapes like this one in the top right that's just sort of a monoculture and has little diversity to offer. Climate change is an issue in terms of the synchronizing between when blooms come and when the pollinators that need those blooms emerge. Like our crazy weather patterns will sometimes, the trees will bloom much sooner than the bumblebees that need those trees emerge, or the caterpillars that need to eat those leaves. So it just gets off that way. And also climate change is an issue because it means that birds and pollinators need to be able to move. Sometimes they need to be able to move to cooler climates. Light pollution, I didn't used to have this in the talk, and then I started reading more and more about how harmful light pollution is. Night lights are for moths and fireflies. So we always encourage people, if you do have security lights, to put them on motion detectors, so you're not just drawing the moths all the time. So the story quickly of the pollinator pathway, it came out of, I was just telling everybody, it was sort of land trust driven at the beginning. It came out of the Hudson to Housatonic Regional Conservation Partnership, which is between the Hudson and Housatonic rivers. And it's lots of land trusts and other conservation organizations that come together to try to preserve big tracts of forest, but also they had a grant and they were tasked with reaching out to the most fragmented parts of our neck of the woods here in the Northeast, which are the suburban and ex-urban communities, like where I live. And so somebody read about a project that had happened in Oslo, Norway, where a woman created a corridor through the city by encouraging people to plant for pollinators, whether in pots or on the roofs of their buildings, or in, just little containers, and making that connection. And so this woman who now was one of the founders of the first pollinator pathway, Donna Merrill, she thought, this is like a great idea. Why don't I try this? Why don't I try to connect people from New York State to Connecticut? So she used the money to give away native dogwood trees. And people were just like all over the idea. There was all this energy. People came out. I mean, it was free trees, but it was also the idea of connecting to your neighbor's property, creating a corridor. So after that was such a success, she was on the Wilton Land Trust. And so she called 3 other conservation organizations, my Watershed Association, the Garden Club, and a nature center together. And we had a meeting and she was like, why don't we do this in Wilton? And so we had an intern who created a logo, we made a brochure, and then I went to the other, I thought this is a good way for me to connect the other 6 towns in our watershed. And so when I started talking to them and they got on board, Ridgefield, Norwalk, then it just kind of exploded. This is just an idea that has traveled on its own. It's now in over 250 towns in Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island. You guys are starting Rhode Island, Maryland, and then some places in the South. Our focus right now is to keep it Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, just because the plant lists, I think it makes sense as a regional focus. This map up here to the right is not updated, but it does show, it's an interactive GIS map that you'll be able to access soon. We're just getting it finished. And you'll be able to click on these squares. The green squares are the towns that are on the pathway. And you'll be able to see who the contact is in that town. And so you can do that for surrounding towns. It'll be a way for you to contact your neighboring towns and stuff. So the idea is, as I said, you can do this in containers, you can put in a garden, land trusts and towns can do whole meadow, like large tracts of land. So it's a scalable idea. And it's a pretty simple message. Rethink your lawn, plant native plants, and avoid pesticides. So I'm going to kind of go through those quickly because these are really, these are the 3 things that if you want to be on the pollinator pathway, this is what you do. You do these 3 things. So I'm going to talk about them a little bit more. I'm going to talk about lawns first. Everyone loves their lawn and, we need our lawns, but we've gone a little crazy on the lawn culture, especially in the Northeast. You can see our area is very green. We have, it's 40 million acres of lawn. This is an EPA statistic, 40 million acres of lawn that people have on their properties. And then if you add golf courses and cemeteries and other lawn-like spaces, it's 50 million acres in the US. So we may have gone a little overboard on the lawns. And why are they causing problems? They provide little habitat. They're monocultures. There's no food or nesting opportunities for our pollinators or for birds or for any wildlife. They add fertilizers and pesticides. Most turf grasses are not native to this area and they require a lot of care. They require, especially if you don't want there to be any dandelions and things, people tend to put large amounts of herbicides on them. And if you can look, so one of the things that they don't do is they don't help filter water. So stormwater runoff is the main source of pollution in our rivers now. And if you look at this, I love this map of the roots. As water comes off your driveway or comes off your roof and is carrying oils and different toxins, when it hits a meadow or where shrubs are planted, where there's deep root systems, it gets caught and it trickles down before it reaches the groundwater or goes into a wetland. And these root systems will help clean those contaminants out. So if you look at this very left-hand turfgrass root system, you can see that that's why turfgrass needs so much water. It just has these really shallow roots. So it's not doing the job that we hope open space is doing in terms of filtering water. Also, because of those shallow root systems, lawns use tons of water. I don't know what things are like in Rhode Island in terms of water policy, but right now across Connecticut, we had 6 years of drought from 2012 to 2017, and there's just a lot of tension. We finally came up with a state water plan to help manage water, and I think it's important. People don't recognize the connection between the water they're using, that it's coming out of the environment, that's coming out of our rivers. So for us, where I live in Fairfield County, Connecticut, in the summertime, 70% of the water is used outside. So we know it's another water company, Aquarian Water Company statistic, that if you have an irrigation system, you use 40% more water than homes that don't have an irrigation system. So, and nationally, we're using 9 billion gallons of water a day to water our lawns. So it's just part of what we need to rethink. It's not to say that everybody should tear up their whole lawn and get rid of their irrigation system, but to just be aware there are smart timers, there are smart systems that you can put on irrigation systems that will meet that, for example, it won't turn on if it's about to rain or if it has just rained, and just sort of common sense changes that we can make that help preserve water. I'm sorry, water is my thing, so I have to go a little bit on and on about it, but it is a big part of this. So this is just a recap, things that you can do, easy things you can do in this process of rethinking your lawn. You can mow less frequently. You can mow higher, set your mower at like 3 inches. There was a study done in Connecticut. Actually, it was in Massachusetts, in Springfield, Massachusetts, where they cut the lawns they cut a lawn every 2 weeks and every 3 weeks at, I think it was like 2.5 inches. And they actually found the lawn that was cut every 2 weeks and it was pesticide free had a larger number of bees. They were counting bees. And a larger, I think maybe every 3 weeks had more bees, but every 2 weeks had a greater bee diversity. So allowing just a longer growth and allowing some violets and dandelions to be in there, you can have what some people are calling a bee lawn. Like this picture on the far right is a very clover-filled lawn. Before the 1940s, when you bought grass seed, it would come with clover mixed in it. And then the pesticide companies after the war started realizing, oh, there's a market for selling this idea that you should not have a single weed in your lawn. So we ended up with what we've got now, these monocultures. You can also reduce the size of your lawn by adding native shrubs, planting clover, like I was saying. You can put in a mini meadow. This is what I've been doing. I'm not equipped to do like a one-time change to my yard, but I've been each year taking up a strip of lawn and putting down wildflower seeds and just adding some native shrubs along the edge. Avoid pesticides. Go easy on the fertilizers. Test your soil to see if what you need. And when you do use fertilizer, go organic. Leave the leaves. I don't know, many of you might be already aware of that, that Leave the Leaves slogan that the Xerces Society has been so good at putting out. That many of our important pollinators overwinter in the leaf matter. So these lawns that are blown, completely clean, you're blowing away the possibility of fireflies and Luna moths, and just so many beautiful pollinators need those leaves. So if you can leave them, rake them back from areas where you can't stand to have them, and just do a later cleanup in the spring. So, you're supposed to have 3 days of 58 degrees or higher before you do your cleanup. And, you get to just relax on the porch and say, it's not time to do that yet. I don't have to do that yet. Then go electric and allow for some dirt patches. That's for ground nesting bees. And a fresh water source is also important. These are just some pictures of lawn transformations that I think are worth seeing. This is one of the somebody from the Stanford Pollinator Pathway who just took up little patches of lawn and put in shrubs. And then the next step is to avoid pesticides. I took this picture. I was riding my bike in New Canaan, and I saw this. It was on June 22nd. I saw that this yard had just been sprayed, and this sign was up, which in Connecticut you're required to put up. I don't know if you guys have these yellow signs in Rhode Island, but and then it was on this catmint, which was covered with bees. So I just took this picture to illustrate what we don't want to do is plant for pollinators, draw them to our yard, and create what we call an ecological trap where they are then exposed to any pesticides that we might have. It's actually better. This is the issue with golf courses. We're working with a lot of golf courses that want to be able to say that they're sustainable and that they have pollinator areas in the rough, and that's great, except that you need to make sure that there are big buffer areas between where pesticides are being used, or to not use them at all. So anyway, this is one of the issues. Um, and so there's lots of information on the website about alternatives to pesticides, and we have a whole pesticide brochure that you can download and give out that we just made that's, I think, quite good. But basically the message is spray yourself instead of your yard. There are many studies that show that just indiscriminate yard spraying does not reduce the incidence of disease when it comes to Lyme disease, which is the main concern I think people rightly have. I think it can give a false sense of security that, oh, there are no ticks in my yard, so I don't have to worry about this. When in fact, it's always important to obviously to check yourself and to be aware. And it's important to landscape to repel ticks naturally. Like, for example, removing Japanese barberry. There's several studies that show barberry harbors the white-footed mouse, which carries the deer tick. So it's also an invasive that doesn't serve our wildlife, our pollinators, and it keeps new tree and shrub saplings from establishing. So it's one of the enemies, the barberry. If you do want to use something for ticks in your yard, we recommend tick boxes. They are boxes that have a little pesticide that they lure the mouse in, and when he goes in, he gets a little shower of pesticide. He goes back to his nest and shares that, but it keeps it contained. So there are also these things, tick tubes, that have cotton in them with pesticide on it, and we don't recommend that because then the mouse takes the cotton back and puts it into holes in the ground. Those holes are sometimes used by bumblebees for their nests, and then the bumblebees encounter the pesticide. So we recommend the boxes. It's like tickboxes.com or something. I think they're pretty easy to find. They're not cheap, unfortunately. They're but they are something you can do that won't hurt pollinators. And then I think just I've noticed, like, creating, and Doug Ptolemy says this too, creating a balance in your yard. So having lots of, high bush blueberry and fruiting trees, native plants, and having greater diversity of wildlife that comes, there becomes a balance. You're going to have your ladybugs there that are going to eat your aphids. I mean, I do think that looking for that natural balance is one of the ways forward. And then go organic, but carefully. A lot of organic products are harmful to pollinators. So I recommend, if you're thinking about using an organic pesticide, Xerces Society. If you're not familiar with it, it's XERCES. It's a national or maybe even international invertebrate organization that protects invertebrates. So they have lots of information. You can look up and there's a link to it on the Pollinator Pathway website. Like neem oil and cedar oil, those are repellents, and some of them are moderately harmful to pollinators. Some are more. So anyway, it's worth looking up before you use. Oh yeah, this is I hope I'm not going to go on too long. I might even kind of skip over this, but these are just some of the beneficial insects that I have been fascinated to discover myself, like the trash bug. This picture in the middle is actually taken on top of my cooler. We were about to go on a kayak ride, and I was like, okay, there's like a breadcrumb that's walking. What, what is this? And then I was like so fascinated that it was a bug. I kind of kept it on the floor of the kayak for this entire trip. And when I got back, I took these pictures of it and looked it up. It's the larvae of this lacewing, which is a natural predator to aphids and other garden pests that we don't want. And it purposefully covers itself in like garbage that's gathered, the exoskeletons of other bugs around. And so it's just camouflaging itself. So, this is one of the joys, paying attention to the bugs. You get to like find things like this trash bug. But anyway, this is our goal. We want to see, this is the pollinator pathway sign that you can put in your yard when you're on the pathway. And we want to see more of those than we do yellow signs. And then this is going to be more of what you can do in your yard, native plants, adding native plants. I tell this story of the two dogwoods. Our native dogwood, Cornus florida, pictured here, has evolved with the blue azure butterfly, which is up here in the right. That's the butterfly we use for our logo as the idea for our logo. This is the little caterpillar, and you can see that it's sort of camouflaged to the branches of the Cornus florida. And when this flower blooms around the time that this caterpillar emerges as a butterfly. So they're synchronized. And then later in the season, the birds are eating those berries. The other dogwood we all know and love is the Kusa dogwood. It's completely beautiful. But these berries are actually food for this Japanese monkey. So just an illustration of the trade-off when we choose non-native plants. We're choosing plants that haven't evolved with our wildlife. So what can you do to be on the pathway, bring more pollinators to your yard? Plant, if you want to do a little perennial garden, or add to a garden some perennial plants, or put in a little mini meadow. We have this handout. This is sort of our main go-to handout for a sunny meadow with a succession of bloom. So these orange squares show when each of these plants blooms. And the idea is that you want to have a nectar and pollen source from early spring through fall, so that you have a buffet there for the pollinators all season. This list was put together by the state entomologists for Connecticut, and it's focused on native bees, but it works for all generalist pollinators. And then there are just so many other plant lists on our website. One that I recommend, the New York Botanical Garden, has a good native plant list that tells you if you have sunny, shady, wet, dry, whatever your conditions are, there's a plant list as part of this that's there for you. And then don't underestimate the importance of our native shrubs, especially for the queen bumblebees that emerge first. They emerge now. They're emerging very early in spring, and they need to find some sustenance before they can go back and lay their eggs. So a lot of the shrubs that are native to the Northeast are the plants that bloom early that these bumblebees need. So this is a great list, also available on the website. And then sadly, I can't tell you how many times we've had people contact us and say, I just cut down all the trees in my yard, and I want to put in a meadow for the pollinators. And we're like, the trees are so important. They're important as larval hosts for all of the butterflies and moths. The eggs are laid, the cocoon is spun, the caterpillars come out, and those are the leaves they need to eat. So that's what the purpose of the larval host. But also many of the blooming, we don't pay attention to our trees are blooming. I mean, I never did until I got involved with this, but to look right now at the red maples in bloom, it's just, nothing is more beautiful. And it's perfect for pollinators because there are so many blooms in one spot. So anyway, we can't underestimate trees. And then this is, I don't think I have time to go into this, but this is a primrose, an evening primrose, which you see along the highway. And when I put in my driveway, I took out some grass and put in a meadow. And then this evening primrose started showing up, and I was like, oh, what is this? It's not that attractive. And I looked it up, and I was like, oh, it's native. I should probably leave it. But it was like 6 feet tall and like kind of gangly looking, and it only blooms at night, So I went down there with my loppers. And I was like, okay, I don't have to keep every, native plant that pops up. And as I was about to cut, I saw this crazy hot pink moth. And so I was like, oh my God, what is this thing? And I took a picture. I looked him up. I put him on iNaturalist, and it is an evening primrose moth. and he's the most gorgeous thing. They feed at night when the flowers open. The male, it looks a little washed out here, but this edge of his tail is actually that bright yellow like that flower. So he goes into the flower when the sun starts to come up, the flower closes around him and he's camouflaged. The tips of his tail are camouflaged. He stays in there all day. And then when the flower opens at night and the female's coming out and she's looking for, some nectar, there he is in the flower. So I was like, okay, I'm not cutting any of these down. I mean, you can cut them down. You don't have to keep them all. But like now I just go out and look for my hot pink moth, and now I think those flowers are beautiful. This is what happens to you. But I do think that putting up one of our habitat signs, pictured here, lets people know, Louise hasn't like lost her mind. This is an intentional little mini meadow, and it looks messy, a little bit messy here for a purpose. And also I think you can make things look intentional if you're letting your grass grow in May or something by mowing the border. Just you can keep things neat, but also a little bit wilder looking. Straight natives versus cultivars. This is another conversation, but these people here are looking at cultivars and counting the pollinators to figure out if if they're serving the pollinators as well. So there's ongoing studies about this. We do know that double blossoms and different leaf colors, cultivars with different leaf colors, like the red bud that has the red leaves, those have been shown to not serve pollinators. The double blossoms don't have any pollen or nectar, but other cultivars can be even better. So it's an ongoing conversation. When in doubt, try to go with straight natives if you can, I think, if you're planting for pollinators. I think I went over all of these different things that pollinators need in your yard. Maybe we didn't talk about, there are a lot of both butterflies, moths, and bees that need to nest in old wood. So like reeds, like the minor bees need to go down into a hollow reed. So if you have just any old wood and reeds, if you just wait till a little bit late in the spring to clean those things up and leave some snags and old wood in the woods wherever you can, that's another thing they need. I think we talked about everything else. This is Doug Ptolemy. If you haven't read his books, most of the ideas behind this, what is really a grassroots movement at this point, the Pollinator Pathway is not an organization exactly. There's a steering committee of people like you guys who've gotten involved and have volunteered to come together to curate the website and a few other projects like that. But the idea is really just to share with each other, so we aren't reinventing the wheel, to share plant lists and ideas and to work together to connect habitat. And that's it. So I'm happy to answer questions, and feel free to email me later if you have more questions. I do really encourage you to check out pollinator-pathway.org. It gives a good overview of what's going on.
Thank you.
Louise, that was fantastic. We did have a couple of questions come into the chat. So if it's okay with you, why don't we start with those and then we can see if other folks have questions from there. So one of the questions that came into a chat was about planting a meadow. So if someone were to try to turn a portion of their yard into a meadow, how do they maintain it? How do they make sure that other things don't take over trees and things that they don't want in the meadow? So I don't know if you or actually Anne, who's on as well, has done a fantastic meadow in her backyard right here in Barrington. So if folks have thoughts on that, that'd be great.
I would be happy for Anne to go first. I can talk about this as well, but Anne, do you want to unmute and answer that, or I can go first, and then if Anne, if you want to chime in.
Okay. We planted an area in the back of our yard. We took out some falling down fruit trees and just weeds, and it's about a 6,000 foot area, and we had some soil brought in and we put down native pollinator mix that we got at Ernst Seeds, which is a good source of native seed if you are looking. And things to know are that we got a lot of invasives coming up along with the meadow plants, so I'm always pulling. But I think I'm making headway, and it's been about 4 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. But anyway, every year the native plants seem to be better, more taking over. So, and it takes them 2 or 3 years to really get established also. So you have to be a little bit patient and be willing to pull weeds, I would say.
Yeah, I think especially at first, and you can also overseed so that you get a really dense, maybe even too dense at first, but it just lessens the opportunity for invasives. And then if you do good solid invasive removal before starting, so
Right.
taking up the grass, or if you do have something like mugwort there, consider maybe tarping for a season or putting down cardboard and chips to really try to get rid of those before you start.
Yeah, that's good.
So we also had a question about someone who doesn't own their home. So what are things, if you're a renter, that you can do? Are there ways to plant beneficial native plants in containers?
Absolutely.
Maybe also some other thoughts on ways that folks can get involved in helping if they don't necessarily control the property where they live.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important part of this, and I work in Norwalk in the city, so we work with a lot of people that don't own their own property. We have a special there's a tried and true pollinator container planting plan that is on the website. A bunch of towns have done them, like along Main Street, and we sort of have looked at what works. There are some annuals on that list that make it kind of look bright during some of the times where the native plants aren't as, zinnias and stuff are thrown in that work well. The other thing that's really important, I've worked with a bunch of people that live in apartment buildings. Even if you don't control, the landscaping, to go to the meetings and just question if lots of pesticides are being used, especially near a waterway. If you see that they're not using native plants, to just bring up these issues to the landscaping crew. I mean, then you're having like a larger effect than anybody, to start that conversation. And that is happening all over the place in apartment complexes, that people are trying to change the way the whole property is managed by just, there's lots of, one of the things you can go to when you go to the website, if you look at especially the page that's how to start a pollinator pathway in your town, there's a toolbox you can click on, and it's all the handouts, like alternatives to pesticides and native plant lists, everything that you might want to give a skeptical landscape person.
Fantastic. So you mentioned zinnias, and we actually had a question that also mentioned zinnias.
Okay.
So just thinking about, often folks are familiar with plants that are frequently annuals in our area that our pollinators seem to love, but they may not be native. So what are your thoughts on incorporating those, and anything that either you or others with experience with that want to share?
Yeah, anybody can chime in, because I'm like, I'm not a master gardener. I'm just a zealot here, that I've just like, I'm so interested in it, but and I'm gathering information as I can, but I'm not really an expert. But the idea of the pollinator pathway is to add natives. It's not to like rip out everything or get rid of your zinnias that you love. It's to think about the fact that there are specialist native insects that need a diversity of what would naturally be here, and to add that. And I think, zinnias are gorgeous, and that they should. There also are a lot of amazing native annuals that you might, that like I didn't know about. Partridge pea. Oh my gosh, you put that in, and that they are buzz pollinated. So the bumblebees come and they have to shake, like blueberries and other things are buzz pollinated. When the bumblebee is on there, the whole flowers are like vibrating, and the thing is just so alive. They bloom kind of early and they spread, and I can't say enough about the partridge pea. But yeah, basically it's just to add and do what what you enjoy. There are no set rules, except no pesticides.
That's great. So I don't know if any of them were able to join us today, but leading up to this, we actually had some questions from our town council people. So
Okay.
two of them in particular who were very interested in this and interested in learning and thinking more about how a municipality can get involved and encourage it. So would love to hear a little bit from you about, anything that you've seen other towns do that have been particularly innovative or interesting that we might be able to encourage our town leaders to do as well.
Well, that is a great question. And I should add that to the sort of the basic talk, because it's such an important part of this to engage the town and the city. So one of the things that started up was, I think it started, I'm trying to think, Newtown, Connecticut, had their town mayor or first selectman read a proclamation that formally read into the town minutes that the town was joining the Pollinator Pathway. So it engages the town council, whatever form it's in the process of reading through what that means, how the things that the town commits to do to help protect pollinators. So there's actually a generic form of that on the website now, and obviously to be edited and changed, but just to look at what a lot of towns have done. So that's step one. But also, like, I work closely with the city of Norwalk on some parks, some that are under the Parks and Rec department, to add native plants, and to some towns here in Connecticut, we have what's called the plan of conservation and development. So every 10 years, a town comes up with like a strategy for conservation and development. And some of the towns have been able to put in language in those plans about using native plants in future development, and reducing pesticides. There's lots going on with pesticides on playing fields and pesticides on municipal properties and on roadsides that can be, there's just more. We could have another talk on that. So there's a big role for municipalities on that, and more to say about that. But a lot of this is on the website, and in fact, we have a blog on the front page of the website that's always changing and kind of goes out as part of the newsletter. And we've introduced municipal ideas as a category, because honestly, the best information is coming from each other. Like, people in New York are doing stuff, people in Pennsylvania, people in Connecticut. So there's always sharing of ideas of what your town can do there. So I recommend looking at that.
That's great. We have 2 or 3 or maybe even more questions that are sort of in the same line or thread. And I'm actually thinking that the website may be the answer to that as well. But I mean, it's okay if it's the same answer. And it's, sort of how to source things, best source for seeds, best source for plants. And then also, there's lots of folks in town that I think would love to do more in their yards, but do rely a lot on landscaping companies to do the work. So just thoughts on how to find someone or how to get the right kind of help. Anything in those sort of threads would be great.
Okay. So the answer for landscapers, one easy answer is that NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farm Association, has a list of accredited organic landscape people. So there's a link to that on the website, but I would go there first and look for somebody who is an organic landscape person. I also really encourage people to just have that conversation with your current landscaper to say, I want to rethink my lawn. I'm thinking of mowing less often. And I think there's plenty for a landscaper to do as you make this transition, because you are going to, if you're watching and letting what's in the seed bank come up on the edges of your yard and, shrinking your lawn a little bit, some of those are going to be amazing natives that you didn't know were there. And some are going to be mugwort, and you're going to need somebody to help you get rid of that. So I think engaging both the nurseries and the landscape companies you're currently working with and letting them know what you want, that you want to make some changes, is important part of this whole mission. So when you're looking for native plants, absolutely go to wherever you buy plants and say, show me your native plants, and can you assure me that these are pesticide free? Because a lot of times the seeds of plants will be coated in pesticides. So then when the plant grows, it can for up to 5 years, it can have these systemic pesticides in them, and you don't want that in the pollen. So a lot of times nurseries will honestly say, you know, we source from all over, I don't know. And then you say, oh, well, you know, I'm specifically planting for wildlife, so I'm going to have to go somewhere else. But we need everybody to know there's a market for organic native plants. There are places that you can order organic plants. There's great sources on the website. But I do think looking around locally, I don't know about Rhode Island. So I guess maybe doing that research and finding good places. One issue with native plants, and one kind of cool thing that's come out of the Pollinator Pathway, is that when we look for these things, most of them come from the Midwest. Prairie Moon, American Meadows, all these places where you might order your native seeds, they come from the Midwest. So we don't have a lot of sources here of wild sourced native plants. So in Connecticut, with Connecticut NOFA, we have started something called the Ecotype Project. They're botanists that are wild collecting native plants from Ecoregion 59, which is most of Connecticut in like Westchester County, New York. And then organic farms are growing what are called founder plots of these plants. And we're collecting the seed. And we have one wholesale nursery that is growing these Ecotype Project plants, we're calling them. So that's the kind of thing. It's like the Wild Seed Project in Maine. It's kind of, we're inspired by that. I think that's another, you know, ambitious part of what's happening is we recognize, well, we don't have a source of local native plants, and we need that. And there's now a market for it. So there's so much opportunity in that direction. That was a long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, that was actually a fantastic answer. I think that was remarkably helpful. I mean, obviously the easy answer that everybody wants is call these two companies and go to these two places. But the reality is this is a growing movement and it's going to take time. And what's really important is for people to know the kinds of questions you want to be asking before you're hiring or purchasing things. So that was very helpful. In the interest of time, you know, there were a couple of folks who put information in the chat about the fact that the town did very recently, it was either late last summer or early fall, pass a new fertilizer ordinance. It maybe wasn't as far sweeping as some folks might have loved it to be, but it was really the first of its kind in Rhode Island. So it was a sort of a big deal. The Land Trust did put an article about that in its, I think it was either the winter or the late fall newsletter, but either way, it's available on the Land Trust website, and there'll be a follow-up article coming out on that in our website, in our newsletter coming out within the next month or so. So folks can find information there along with, of course, on the town website. But I want, in the interest of time, to let Cindy Pierce sort of help to wrap us up a bit in talking about a couple of next steps that are planned for this project, which is very much in its infancy, but we are thrilled with how many people were here today.
Thank you guys so much. I'm so excited. Yay, Rhode Island.
Thank you, Louise, so much. It was such a wonderful presentation. Cindy, I think you covered a lot of it. So we did mention that we were planning a native plant sale for May, and we have decided to postpone that to the fall. It's a bit early to get native plants, and with the pandemic, it's been a bit tricky, the planning of it, and fall will be a great time. So please stay up to date, check our website, our Facebook page. Everyone who's registered here today will go on a list, and we'll send out periodic updates and information. And we hope to connect people in town, you know, and to share information and to do more together as things sort of open up. And hopefully that will happen this summer and the fall. Did I forget anything? And please ask questions, you know, write to us, you know, walk your neighborhoods, find people who have amazing gardens, you know, knock on their doors, and we're going to try to connect people in town in the future. And if you have ideas about expanding the project or what to do here in town, we love and love are looking for partners, people to help expand the pathway. So please reach out to us and each other. And thank you for coming. And thanks, Louise, again.
You're welcome. I see in the chat that someone has an 800-page organic front lawn article. I would love to see that.
I would love to see that too.
Yeah, maybe you could share that with everybody. That would be great.
I had actually privately chatted and asked for a copy of it.
Yes.
So apparently I'm not the only person that's interested in reading 800 pages in that. So
Yeah, I'll read it.
we'll follow up on that and see if we can have folks read that.
Yes.
There's probably a lot of people on here that would love that.
There's Jason.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. That's my wife, Amalia Flynn. She got her PhD at Salve Regina University. And I was joking in the chat, Cindy, that you all would probably be the only people to have read the dissertation. So besides her mom.
I know a lot of people that will read that. So
A lot of the books in our little library are all focused on this. We had a great vision to turn our front lawn into a wonderful meadow. I'm in the military. We ended up adopting, and our adopted son has autism. So a lot of our plans kind of went by the wayside, but we are trying to do what little we can with the time that we have. So anyway, thank you all for this wonderful presentation and this great idea for Barrington.
Thank you.
I'm also seeing the Rhode Island Wild Plant Society would like to partner, and I'd be so happy to connect them to the Ecotype Project people if they're not already connected. So just shoot me an email with that too. That's perfect.
And the Rhode Island Wild Plant Society is going to be having an online plant sale. You have to be a member, but that is going to be happening. You can check their website for I don't know if they've posted the date yet, but that is upcoming this spring.
Those are great. That's the best place to buy plants, things like that. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from?
Lots of great comments in the chat. But do tell your friends. This was recorded. It will be on the Land Trust website. We'll share it through our Facebook and Instagram pages as well. So you can send it to neighbors, friends, family, and have other folks watch it later on.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise.